If you do find yourself feeling dysregulated at any point, find a way to ground yourself. So we talked about A, you can calm your mind by labeling and describing the emotion. And B, you can calm your body by using breathing techniques, stimulating the vagus nerve, and other strategies that we discussed. But at the end of the day, I would just say be good to yourself. This is such a challenging thing, and just be kind to yourself. Speak to yourself kindly, treat yourself with care and love, just as you would to a friend. Because this is going to be a tough day, but you're going to overcome it. Trust yourself and just try your best to use what we talked about today.
Hi, superhumans. I'm Dr. Mavis Garcia.
And I'm Dr. Wise.
We're two of the physician leaders at Markham Fertility Center, otherwise known as Our Baby, MFC.
As fertility specialists, we've witnessed firsthand the challenges, triumphs, and the myriad of emotions that come with trying to conceive. Whether you're just starting to think about having a baby, actively trying, or facing challenges along the way, My Fertility Podcast will be your go-to resource for honest conversations and a supportive community.
So grab a cup of coffee or tea and settle in, and let's demystify the world of fertility together. Many of you asked us on the Instagram account to do a podcast episode about the upcoming Mother's Day, and specifically, what are some of the coping strategies to deal with the complex set of emotions for those that are struggling with infertility. So we did exactly that, and today we have Kristina Virro. Kristina Virro is an entrepreneur and psychotherapist dedicated to helping people feel less stuck and more empowered in their lives. She is the owner of Fresh Insights, which continue to support people of all ages and backgrounds. She has a passion for enhancing mental health, and she's very active on social media. She talks to us today about the different emotions that might come up during Mother's Day, how partners can support you during this difficult time, what are some of the coping strategies to take on this day. And at the end of the episode, she gives us with some advice on how to keep your hope and the resilience alive during this difficult journey. I hope that you enjoy it. We certainly had an amazing conversation with her. And we sincerely hope that this episode helps you in navigating the difficult day for many.
Thanks so much for joining us to talk about this really important topic and timely topic. And for those of you listeners who are interested in hearing more from Kristina Virro, check her out on Instagram. Her handle is @Kristina Virro. That's KRISTINA VIRRO.
Thank you so much, Kristina, for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. And it's nice that you invited me because I think this is such an important topic to discuss that a lot of people don't think about. I think most people, if they haven't gone through a fertility journey, just think that Mother's Day is a happy day for everyone and it doesn't even really cross their mind. So when you said you wanted to do an episode on this, I thought that is such a good idea. And I'm so happy to be here and speak about it.
Excellent. Tell us, first of all, what are some of the emotions that individuals struggling with infertility may experience, which you're right, is not all happy for everybody?
The first one that comes to mind for me is just probably this sense of dread of here it comes, it's on the calendar, I'm leading up to it, and just not wanting to deal with it because it's already hard enough to be going through infertility, let alone when you have this very painful reminder on this day, right? And I think most people going through infertility are experiencing grief kind of all the time. There's this idea of what they thought their life would look like that they have to grieve. There's this idea of having a really fun pregnancy that they can enjoy and all of these things that they also might not get to experience at all. And then even things like this, right? Experiencing grief on Mother's Day of what hasn't happened for you. And I explain to a lot of people I work with or anybody going through infertility that I describe infertility as what's called disenfranchised grief. And what that means is that it's a type of grief that typically goes invalidated or just not acknowledged at all in society, which makes it that much harder to overcome, right? Because if you think about somebody passing away, for example, our society, A, says that's a hard thing that you went through and we feel bad for you. B, we have all of these rituals around it, like funerals or burials or whatever it happens to be. And 3, we sort of have a much better idea of how to support people. Like that's when somebody will drop off food at the house or they'll check in regularly. But that is not always, and actually that's seldom the experience of somebody who's going through infertility because A, some people might not even think that you lost anything, which is extremely painful. That just comes with all of those ignorant statements like, oh, at least you only miscarried at 1 month, these horrible, horrible things So people may not even think you lost anything. And then because of that, you've gone through this really difficult experience that you're just sort of floating around saying, okay, what do I do with this? So I think having that language in and of itself can be really helpful for people.
Oh, I really like that term. I never heard it before.
I was just going to say that's disenfranchised grief. I think that's such a really interesting phrase. And I think it really just names it so well. That's fantastic. Encapsulates it perfectly. That's really great. How does societal pressure to become a mother impact? Do you feel those dealing with infertility? What's your experience with that working with patients?
There's sort of two belief systems that are going on. One is that everybody wants to be having children and that they should have children. And second is that it should happen easily, right? And what that results in is a lot of questions. This is something that so many people I work with dread is they go to a function and people will say, oh, so when are you having kids? And meanwhile, they've been trying like 2 years and they just aren't really sure how to talk about that. So both of those things make this a very, very isolating experience as well, because then you don't really want to go to functions or you don't really want to talk about this subject. And so you might retreat quite a bit. But certainly we've all been conditioned to believe that, when I was in sex ed in high school, it was like, let's talk about how not to get pregnant because it's so easy to get pregnant.
Right.
There was never, ever a note of, oh, FYI, some people don't get pregnant. So I think that the effects of that are pretty pronounced, actually.
Hmm. I mean, it's this day to honor mothers, and the day should exist, but it must be such a painful reminder that you're not due to be honored yet, right? Like you haven't made it there. I mean, I imagine because I've been there, but it's a huge reminder of the thing that you haven't accomplished that you want so much. And then, of course, you're expected to go to the function and celebrate with the family. And then you might have sisters or aunts or friends who are celebrating and they get the flowers or they get the presents. And then you're sitting there like it's Christmas and you're the only child who was naughty and didn't get a present from Santa.
Exactly. I know. It's just such a painful experience. I mean, it's sort of like imagine if you got fired and then that night you had to go to a party because your friend got promoted. That's 1/10 of what it's
Yes.
for somebody,
Yes.
It's just so tough.
And then, of course, there is the mixed emotions of, oh, I should be happy for my friend. I should be happy because my mother is alive and I'm celebrating with her. Or I should be happy because I've only been trying for this amount of time. That I should be happy, I think is something I hear all the time from my patients the guilt that somehow their feelings are not valid, that they should be doing it differently, that they should be better or more evolve, for lack of a better word, and have different emotions that what they're actually having. So that layer of guilt on top of the grief can be right. It can be
Oh, yeah.
quite upsetting as well.
Yes, that is a huge theme I also notice because I find that so many people who are going through infertility are very judgmental of their emotions. So their friend will get pregnant, for example, or like you said, Mother's Day comes and part of them might be extremely angry. And that is totally normal. That is something I want to say is that if you're having a hard time with this day, don't be mean to yourself about that. Of course, you're going to have a hard time with this day. And something I often talk about is something called dialectical thinking, which is when you basically allow two things to be true at the same time. And our brains are not very good at this. I think we have a really hard time at doing this in general, but it's about allowing yourself to say, okay, I can be really happy that I have a mother and she's great and la, la, la. And not but and I can also appreciate that this is a really hard day for me. And the other thing that I talk about a lot as well is that there's a very big difference between your feelings and your behaviors. So if you're sitting with your therapist or a really close friend and you're like, I just feel really, really angry, that's fine. Now, if you're going out and writing hate posts about mothers, that's different. That's a problematic behavior. But you're entitled to have a feeling no matter how intense it is.
When you're experiencing these feelings and you're going through all of this, but you still have to probably go to your Mother's Day brunch or the baby showers and all the other things, how do you communicate it to people? What words you use in terms of talking to your family or friends about how you're feeling? How can you navigate that?
I will spend entire sessions going through this because everybody's very
Mm.
different. Some people don't actually want to tell anybody because for them, they really value some of the benefits that come with privacy. So, some of those benefits are that people aren't giving you unsolicited advice all the time or sharing their judgments because sometimes that happens. People will say, well, I'm going through infertility. And then somebody will say, oh, have you tried drinking green tea 3 times a day? Because I just read this article in Women's Health that says that makes you, and it's like, oh my God, that's not helpful. Sometimes people don't want to have those conversations. So we might weigh the pros and cons of that. Other people, what we might do is practice what they are going to say with what feels right. So it might be something like, oh, we've actually been trying, but we haven't been having success. And that's not something I want to talk about at this venue. And then you rehearse it over and over and over. But I think working with a therapist one-on-one to figure out what works best for you and why that works best for you and what that looks like is really helpful for just feeling more prepared for these really emotionally charged conversations.
Do you have any other coping strategies for people who are managing these emotions?
Yeah, there's a lot that come to mind. So one thing that comes to mind is this might be a day where you don't go on social media because I think that is where we can see so much content, right? We're going to see the pictures of the moms and the pictures of the families and all of these really, really sappy and heartfelt captions. And that's really lovely, but it's actually really not lovely when you are
Yeah.
going through this. So I think this would be a really good day to just stay off of your phone. You also might want to create your own rituals. Of course, we hope that you don't have to go through many without having a child, but maybe just do your own thing. Like you get out of town and you go to the spa by yourself, or maybe you and your partner go on a getaway. I had read this really cute thing that apparently Adam Sandler and his wife sent Jennifer Aniston flowers every Mother's Day because they knew that she was going through infertility. So if you're a friend listening to this, that might be something very, very nice to do. Um,
That's really sweet.
the nicest thing, I feel like Adam Sandler's like the nicest person in real life. But yeah, so I think that friends, if you're listening, like I said, finding a way to maybe just send a message or send flowers or send a letter or send something by Uber Eats can be really, really nice. And another thing I'll say is that just because you don't have a baby at this point in time, that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot to celebrate. I think there's so much to celebrate when you're somebody who's going through a fertility journey because you're being really perseverant. You are resilient. You are going to all of these appointments and getting poked and prodded, and you're having to keep going. Maybe you can be very explicit about this and make it an exercise of writing down all the things that you've accomplished so far, all of the strengths that you have, all the things that you're proud of. And you can use Mother's Day to celebrate that because there's a whole lot to celebrate there.
When I was going through my own journey, I dreaded Mother's Day so much. But I mean, my mom is amazing and she deserves to be celebrated. And my family is religious about celebrating. I could never get away with it. And if I went away, my mom would kill me. I had to be there, I had to be around. But I dreaded it so much. And I think what got me through it is I used to remember I used to write a letter to myself a year later. Something like, I'm here writing on our last day as Mother's Day without a child. And now that happened a few years because my journey was quite long. But to me, it really helped me to think that this might be my last year as of Mother's Day without a child. And I would always make a point of connect with that person of the future that had achieved what she had achieved. Actually, I think halfway through the journey, I wrote to the past, like me in the Mother's Day the year before, right? And talked about all the things that I had learned through that time. So, anyways, that's just my thing. I like writing letters, I like journaling, and Mother's Day was a really, really, really tough time. And I would have loved to go on a trip, but that wasn't an option in my family.
I hear you. And what that also reminds me of, so if you're in a situation where you have to go to a Mother's Day event, that's where we can get creative with boundary setting. For example, maybe you only go for a shorter period of time than usual. And I'm kind of a believer that if you sometimes need to make up a tiny excuse for the sake of self care that is extremely needed,
Hmm.
just do it. You know what I mean? Obviously, that's not a strategy that you want to use all the time. And we want to be honest with people and all of that. But sometimes when that's not an option, because maybe people don't know about our fertility journey, that's fine to say, listen, I have to go to something at 5, so I have to leave at that time for your own self protection, right? Or it can look like setting boundaries in other ways. So something I often recommend is finding quiet time during that event. So if, for example, the conversation at the dinner table is kind of upsetting you, that's when you can go do the dishes and you can spend some time in the kitchen. Or maybe somebody calls you and they really need to talk to you on the phone and you get caught on a phone call in air quotes for 30 minutes. So there's things that you can do for self protection. And again, that's where you can just work with a therapist, figure out what some of those strategies might look like. But you do have options, even if you do have to go to the event.
Right. how about some techniques for in the moment? So I'm thinking somebody's in the car, they're in the driveway, they need to get out of the car and face the music, so to speak, and they're having palpitations and sweating and thinking, I just don't think I can get through that door. What are some techniques in that moment to sort of bring your sympathetic overdrive into normal or into the realm of normal and get through things?
There's two things we want to look at. The first thing we want to do is focus the mind and calm the mind down. So, how we can do that is by activating the prefrontal cortex. So, that's the part of our brain. I'm putting my hand on my forehead right now for people who can't see me. But right there, that's your prefrontal cortex. And that's in charge of logical thinking and planning and those types of more logical activities. When we're able to name an emotion and describe it to ourselves, it sounds counterintuitive because it's like, well, why would I want to stay with that emotion? But by doing that, you're actually activating that part of the brain. So you might sit there and say, okay, what am I feeling right now? I'm actually feeling really anxious. I feel that in my body, in my chest, and I notice that my heart rate is high. Some people can get even more descriptive with it. So there might be an image that comes to mind, or a color, or a sensation, and just allowing yourself to name all of those things is really helpful. There's an expression in the world of psychology that says name it to tame it. And you name the emotion to tame that psychological reaction that you're having. That's the first thing we can do to sort of calm the mind. The second thing that we want to do is calm the body. And this is where a lot of experimentation comes in of what your nervous system likes best. For some people, there's different breathing techniques that we can use that are specific to calming anxiety. For example, a lot of people have been told to take deep breaths when they're anxious. You actually want to take long exhales. So if you can only focus on having really long, slow exhales, as long and as slow as possible, that's what's going to help to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that branch of the nervous system that's known as the rest and digest. So when you're calm and you're feeling good and you're feeling collected, it's the parasympathetic nervous system that's in play. But then there's other things that we can do as well. There's specific grounding exercises that I really like, and you can work one-on-one with a therapist for that. For example, one that I've done with people is have them really feel their feet on the floor. Sometimes I even have them stomp their feet on the floor a little bit. That can feel good to get out some of that anxious or angry energy or whatever that happens to be. But you're trying to do anything to bring your body to the present moment, because sometimes when we're triggered, I kind of liken it to time traveling. You might actually go back to that appointment where you found out that your IVF cycle wasn't successful or whatever it happens to be. So you want to do anything to bring yourself back to the here and now. Those are a few starting points that you can try on for size. But again, everybody's different, right? I know a lot of people will say, oh, do something slow, do some Tai Chi movement in that moment or whatever. That actually does not work with my personal nervous system. I'm the person that needs to like stomp around or push a wall. That's another one I really, really like. So you go to the bathroom and you push a wall as hard as humanly possible because it's going to help to give that release of adrenaline. You need to try these things on yourself and say, okay, what does my body respond to best?
The breathing technique works really well for me. That's something that I use. And another thing that I do when I am anticipating an event that it's going to make me anxious is to do it in my mind before I actually have to do it in real life. So I'll sit there and I would actually picture as much detail as I can, walking through the door, talking to the person, and to whatever is going to immediately come and tell me what's wrong with you or whatever worst case scenario you think. I actually leave it in my mind multiple times over. And I find that it's counterintuitive in a way. Like it's different from ruminating. It's a little bit of a meditative thing or just showing your brain, okay, these bad things are going to happen and these are all the things that we're going to do about it. And then at the end, we're going to come out of it okay. So it might be counterintuitive, but I find that that works for me, going to that moment that you are anticipating and leaving it in your mind.
Yes,
I
because
don't know if there's a psychological term for that.
what I see that as is your planning, right? And what I always will say to people is, you know your family better than anybody, and we're going to use that to our advantage. We will say, okay, tell me what's going to happen on Mother's Day. And most of the time, people are pretty correct in terms of what happens. So, okay, when your dad says, oh, you're not pregnant yet, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? And exactly what you said, you're rehearsing before the bad thing happens. And that gives you that sense of being prepared, like I was mentioning before.
I have to say, you're so right, Dr. Christie. I think you're a big fan of the deep breathing and the breathing exercises when you're stressed or you're trying to calm
Yeah.
yourself down. I
Yeah.
picked up humming somewhere along the way. And I always thought it was just a weird personality quirk. But then somebody explained to me that it actually has a scientific, psychological explanation. I know that when I am like in that moment of that fight or flight of oh my goodness, I can feel my heart rate rising, I hum. And I find that that really helps me actually.
I can explain that a little bit for people who are listening. What you're doing when you're humming is activating something called the vagus nerve. It's this really long cranial nerve that goes from our brain to our stomach to our facial muscles, all of these different things. And when we are able to activate that nerve, it can directly turn on that parasympathetic nervous system that we were mentioning before. Humming is a great one. Also, gargling is a good one. So
Oh,
gargling, I don't know what the right word there is, but
Gardening. Yeah, yeah.
gargling, there you go. So even if you go to the bathroom, you just put some water in your mouth from the tap and you gargle there for a little bit.
Yeah.
That's also going to help to activate that parasympathetic nervous system through the vagus nerve.
Oh,
And,
cool.
and there's a lot of other vagal nerve exercises that you can try. Another one is you sit down and you activate your glute muscles as much as you possibly can. That one is helpful because you can do it at the dinner table, so you don't even have to leave. So, but yeah, so the vagus nerve is a very cool one too, and some of those breathing exercises help with that as well. The humming, the gargling, the glute muscles. Yeah, it's all very
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah. What advice do you have for partners? It could be a male partner, a female partner at a function. How can partners support their partners going through infertility?
I often recommend coming up with a code word together and figuring out what that code word means. So if I say, "Oh, my friend Julia has called 3 times," that means we need to get the hell out of here, and you're going to help me do that. Be on the same page about that, talk about that. I would also say that this is a day and this is a time where you really just want to validate your partner. This is not the time to be like, "But I think your mom has great intentions." Well, she doesn't today, okay? She just doesn't. So just allow your partner to feel what they're feeling. Lots of it totally makes sense to me why you feel that way. I totally understand. Your feelings are super valid. And you know what? For anybody listening, that applies to outside of infertility as well. I think learning to validate our partner is a skill that we all need to harness a little bit more.
For
Mhm.
sure. For sure. My
Yeah, I think
husband would agree with you.
Yeah.
it is true. It is absolutely true. They're living it. It's their experience of it. And whether that's how we see the world or not, I'm trying. I'm really working hard on being better at validating my partner's feelings. It's one of my goals for the year.
And sometimes you can just say, do you just need to vent or do you want some solutions? Because if they say, no, I just need to vent, just let yourself vent the hook. You don't need to
That is
get
so, so key because when you get what you're not looking for, like, oh my God, it's infuriating, right? When somebody starts trying to be logical and give you solutions and you just want to just complain and vent and just get out those emotions.
exactly. And it's not malicious, the intention, right? I find most of the time people, and this goes for infertility big time, our friends or family who are suggesting the green tea or whatever, they don't mean any harm. And we do need to remember that. It's really easy to walk around and say, oh, well, nobody understands. And they keep asking me all these offensive questions. But in their mind, they're not offensive questions. They're genuinely trying to be helpful. So I always believe that it's a lot more empowering to say, okay, well, how do I deal with my emotions when that happens rather than saying, how can everybody else accommodate me and not push my buttons? Well, good luck with that because that's not the world we live in, unfortunately, right?
Right, right,
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
I know the term triggers gets used all the time and that things can be triggering. I'm wondering if your experience as a therapist, what do you think of this term triggers? And is it overused? Is it an empowering term to use? What is your thoughts?
That's a good question. I think that the word trigger is used way too often. I think mostly what people are saying is, I'm emotionally dysregulated. That's all they're saying most of the time, right? So you can say that. You can say, oh, I'm having a lot of intense emotion. What I define an actual trigger as is that you are experience symptoms related to having a traumatic episode that's occurred in the past. So being told that you're infertile, for example, or that you didn't get pregnant or that you had a miscarriage, that is an actual trauma in my
That is trauma. Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Like your
Mhm.
whole worldview has been shattered. Your nervous system has now been reoriented because now you're hypervigilant about things. You're anxious. You're not sleeping, all of these things. So that's an actual trauma. So when somebody said something about giving birth or getting pregnant and you are reminded of that trauma and you have symptoms, that's what an actual trigger is.
Mm.
But to say, my uncle made a comment and it pissed me off, that you're not triggered, you're upset. That's totally fine. There's been a lot of work in the field of trauma to define these words. So I don't want us to go around misusing them.
Yeah. That's great that you say that because I know I've heard from some people in the infertility community saying exactly that. Everybody's talking about triggers and it invalidates their trauma a little bit as well because it makes it sound like they're just upset at something. And it's like, no, it's an actual trigger because it was an actual trauma that happened. And it goes to your question of people not understanding that infertility is trauma and it's grief.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, big time.
How can we help patients? How can partners help people maintain that hope and that resilience, even in the face of these difficulties and these challenges, in the face of finding these things that are particularly triggering, like Mother's Day?
Something I often say to people that I find gives them a sense of hope is that I actually feel that infertility prepares you to be a parent extremely well. And it's going to sound weird, but I'll explain what I mean. Typically, when people go through infertility, it highlights problems in their relationship or it highlights things that they're already dealing with. So typically, if you're an anxious person, infertility will just put that on overdrive and you're really, really anxious. If you're somebody who's a little bit of a self described control freak, for lack of a better word, then you'll see that even more during infertility. So we can see this as a really, really good opportunity to work on that stuff so that when you do have a child, not if, but when, you will be the best parent on the planet. You will know how to support them when they're feeling anxious. You will have a stronger relationship. You will have a stronger sense of self and you'll know what it's like to go through something hard and get back up. And you'll be able to teach that to your child. And I, even just in the language that I use, just as I did of it's not if, but when you're going to have a child. And it's just a matter of how we want to do that. Just sometimes giving that reminder to people when they're really struggling helps a lot because they're in the thick of it. They're in the weeds, they can't see that. So having somebody say it will happen somehow, some way, it's just up to you to figure out how you want it to happen can be helpful.
That's beautiful, actually.
Oh, I'm glad you think so.
It's hard sometimes to have hope when you're going through fertility. And I know sometimes I tell patients, as a fertility specialist, I might say the embryo is euploid and I feel great about this and this can definitely happen. And they said to me, I'm afraid to hope because I don't want to get my heart broken. Or they have had so many disappointments that they just stop believing that it's possible. But I agree with you. As a fertility specialist, I consider myself also part of my job is to be a cheerleader and to make sure that that rate of hope and faith remains present, even if it's a little bit dimmed, even if you have to dig a little deeper to get it. It needs to be present because otherwise, it's just a lot harder to get up in the morning and do the things that you're supposed to do when you've lost all hope.
Absolutely. And at the same time, I was just thinking about how this is where being really attuned to your patients comes in, or just your friends or your family, because I've had some times where I can just feel it that somebody's in that place where they're like, I actually feel like garbage. I don't feel hopeful. And it's not connecting if I try to do it. And so in those situations, I drop that agenda and I just really validate that fear, right? Because that makes total sense. Your brain is really trying to protect you. You've been hopeful in the past and it hasn't worked out. So, yeah, this is really, really hard. And sometimes just allowing somebody to also feel hopeless, as paradoxical as it sounds,
Yes.
helps them feel heard and seen, right? Because a
Mm.
lot of people are trying to say, no, but it'll work out. And sometimes that actually feels annoying, right?
Mhm.
So just stay in tune with what your friend or patient or whoever is experiencing. And this is where your training as a health professional comes in.
Yes.
I just
Yes.
thought it was worth mentioning.
Yes, no, absolutely. It's all about having given them space. Sometimes when I sense that, I make a deal. I said, okay, how about you give me 1% hope and I'll do the other 99%?
I
You
love
know, and I think that works because we're not giving up. I'm telling you, I'm going to do all the work for you of being hopeful. And all you have to do is this little. And then they take some time. They're like, okay, I can do 1%. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, deal. I'll do the other 99 and we're good to go.
Yeah, a variation of that I've used is, okay, so today it's going to be a hopeless day. What are you going to do tomorrow to make it a hopeful day?
That's absolutely accurate. I think that as fertility physicians that are seeing patients, our role is absolutely to be the cheerleader, to be the person who's going to support them in that hope and give them the spark, hopefully, to sort of say, okay, if this person is hopeful for me, then maybe I do have a reason to be hopeful. And hope is infectious, right? In the sense that when you see somebody else that is hopeful, that's smiling, that has this positive feeling, these positive vibes, I think that that inspires people to still feel hopeful and to still feel like there is a reason to keep going. Because if there's no hope, then why are we even bothering, right? Which is absolutely not where we want to be. And it's not the case at all. But you're right. It is always a challenge to sort of balance the two sides, to validate people's feelings, to allow them to feel hopeless. Because we all need those days, right? Where we're just like, the world sucks and I'm just going to lie on the sofa today, but not to stay there and to get back up and to keep going, right? And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges for me is the balancing of those two things in the space of an appointment, right?
100%. Yeah.
So as we're just wrapping up here, can you give us a bullet point list of ways to help handle Mother's Day for patients who are going through fertility struggles?
Certainly. So, first of all, acknowledge and validate that this is going to be a hard day and that it's totally normal, right? So, we talked about dialectical thinking where two things are allowed to be true at the same time. So, you're allowed to feel frustrated or upset, or you're allowed to grieve and know that this is a day of joy for other people. That's totally fine. Two, you can decide how you do want to cope with the day. So that might look like setting some boundaries. If you do have to go to an event, it might look like doing something for yourself for self-care, like taking a little break or having a getaway or going to the spa on your own or whatever it happens to be. Number three, I would say is stay away from your phone that day because I'm suspecting that that's going to be quite a triggering place on social media. Step four, if you do find yourself feeling dysregulated at any point, find a way to ground yourself. So we talked about A, you can calm your mind by labeling and describing the emotion. And B, you can calm your body by using breathing techniques, stimulating the vagus nerve, and other strategies that we discussed. I probably missed something in there, but at the end of the day, I would just say be good to yourself. This is such a challenging thing, and just be kind to yourself. Speak to yourself kindly. Treat yourself with care and love, just as you would to a friend. Because this is going to be a tough day, but you're going to overcome it. Trust yourself and just try your best to use what we talked about today.
Thank you so much, Kristina. That is so helpful. Thank you for coming to our podcast last minute to cover this important topic and for providing so much quality advice from a mental health professional. Dr. Weiss and I felt that we really weren't qualified to cover this topic. So thank you so much for doing that. And I'm sure that there are many people who are going to appreciate it and take your advice to survive Mother's Day.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. It was wonderful to have you as a guest. And hopefully we'll have you on again in the future to discuss other topics because there's mental health challenges that we can cover too.
Absolutely.
And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast or visit us online at myconfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episodes.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss. Music from Mix Kit Raising Me Higher by Ajay Stelino. My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.